Hans Niemann is a legend of chess. You can like him, you can hate him. We can talk about for hours about him as a chess player or a human being. But in the end, we all agree that he does bring some extra attention to the game. So that is great. And now Hans is rated over 2700 and he is in the top 25 in the world. But he does complain that he doesn't get enough invitations to compete with the world's best players. So Hans came up with a very interesting solution as he is now organizing his own tournaments. So the concept is new. He is going to play in different cities in the world against different grandmasters. So the first match is actually taking place right now in the Netherlands as Hans is taking on Dutch #1 Giri, top grandmaster, and it's very fascinating new format as in 5 days they are going to play 24 games in total. So it's a grueling schedule as on the first day 12 blitz games were played. Hans actually won that 7.5, 4.5, but the classical games, they are counting for double points. In fact, for each win in the classical section you get 3 points. Now on the next 3 days they play 6 classical games, so 2 classical games per day. That's actually really intense, something which most grandmasters, at least top players, they are not doing that anymore. They're risking too much, like they don't want to lose their rating because of tiredness. They want to prepare well for their games. But now the most interesting game of the match so far was played in the classical section. Hans is playing with the white pieces against Giri, and let's have a look at this game. Hopefully you find it as beautiful as I do. So here we go, 1 e4 played by Hans, and as we can expect, Anish plays the move c5. He's going for the Sicilian. Knight f3, d6, d4, the open variation, pawn takes d4, knight takes d4, knight f6, knight c3, a6. This is Anish Giri's favorite opening, the Sicilian Najdorf. And Hans goes for the system with bishop d3, one of the many possibilities, but this has become quite popular in recent years. The idea for white is that after the move e5, the knight is going back to e2. This may look strange, but very soon the knight will find different ways to become active. For instance, it may come to g3, but there are other ideas as well. Let's have a look. Bishop e7 played, castling kingside, bishop e6, and white goes for the move f4. So one of the points is that if black is ever going to take, you may consider recapturing with a knight when the knight is beautifully placed on f4, hitting the bishop, controlling the d5 square. So things are looking quite nice here for white, but this is very well-known theory. Let's have a look how Anish responds. Castling kingside. The white goes for the move a4, typical move to prevent black from playing the move b7, b5, queen c7, king h1, getting out of that diagonal. Never there's any going to be any check here. Knight bd7, and note that you can't really trap the bishop here with the move f5 because the bishop can always come to c4 when it can count on the support of the queen on c7. So white continues developing. Bishop e3, rook ac8. And now white fixes the pawn structure on the queen side. Very interesting move. Not doing too much at this moment, but it's like a long-term positional plan. White is hoping that in the end, these pawns on the queen side, they can become vulnerable. Rook fe8 played, so the tension in the center remains. Black doesn't want to take, and so also white doesn't want to release the tension yet. So more waiting moves are going to be seen here. White goes h3. Black goes for h6, queen goes to e1, and now things are getting interesting. Like knight c5 played, and here Hans puts his queen on g3. So it's clear that now with the queen here, he's looking at ideas, for instance, to take or to advance the pawn to hit the bishop, and then take the pawn on h6, exploiting the pin as the pawn on g7 is not allowed to move. So black reacts here with knight h5, attacking the queen. The queen goes back. Now pawn takes f4, pieces are getting swapped here. Bishop takes f4, knight takes f4, knight takes f4. So what should we think of this position? As black does have the bishop pair, these two bishops, they are looking nice, but white is also controlling the center, and these knights, they are controlling the d5 square. So black dropped back with a bishop to d8. Remarkable move if you're not familiar with these positions, but the point is that now after knight to d5, you're attacking the queen goes away, and this bishop is controlling the b6 square, so it prevents white from placing the knight on that square, forking the queen and rook. White activates his pieces. Queen is coming into d4, beautiful central post for the queen, and well, white is looking for ideas to build up some pressure on the king side. Maybe knight h5, maybe the rooks, they can come into the game. Looks like white, thanks to his piece activity, is doing pretty well here. But look at this, bishop takes knight. White does take back with a knight as well, and now queen e6, adding more pressure to the pawn on e4. Typical plan, the pawn on e4 is now 3 times attacked by queen, rook and knight, only twice defended. But the queen goes to b4, very interesting move. What is the queen going to do there? Well, first of all, it keeps an eye on the pawn on b7. So whenever the knight is moving somewhere, okay, that pawn is quite vulnerable. Second point, and that's the tactical idea behind white's move, is that after knight takes e4, you can, for instance, take with the bishop, queen takes e4, and then it's rook a e1. That is the key idea, so that here you're hitting the rook on e8 indirectly. If you take on b4, you take that rook with check, after which you can take back the queen with your knight. So that is looking quite nice for white. Black cannot do that, of course. And well, if white does get time, he will look for ways to improve his rooks next. Let's see what happens. Queen g6 played, and now the rook comes into f3. Very good move, consolidating the position. And now still the pawn on e4 cannot easily be taken. The easiest move here for white is just to take on b7 to hit the rook on c8. And well, black is in trouble, so black shouldn't do that. Instead, rook f8 was played. Remarkable move, overprotecting your pawn on f7, guarding your king side. And black is trying to hold the position together with the knight on c5. But white has a simple plan. Rook a f1, bishop to g5, activating the bishop, and here rook to g3 played. Look at this. Now there is a lot of trouble on the g file potentially, and maybe white has ideas to go h4 at some point. So the queen leaves the g file again, queen e6, and look at this, queen to d4. The queen has done its job. It is now centralized again. So what should black do here? Because h4 is coming next. If the bishop will have to move, then the pawn on g7 is in serious trouble. So here black played the move g6. I believe this is a very logical move, but there is a clear drawback, as now the game is actually starting. I mean, this was just the start of the game. We are building up and things are getting really interesting now. Look at this. Rook takes g5 played, eliminating that bishop, which looked like it was a very bad piece, but it's an important defender of the f6 square. So now the bishop is gone, the knight can come in to f6 with check. The king gotta go to h8 or g7 even, but now it is knight d7 with a discovered check. The king will probably have to move, or at least you have to solve the check now. f6 was played, knight takes f8. White wins the material back here by taking on f8. Rook takes f8. For now, everything is still pretty well defended, but another key move as white is fighting for the initiative. Bishop to c4 played. Excellent move. You're attacking the queen, and still this pawn on e4 can't be taken because of queen takes d6, hitting the rook on f8 and also the knight on c5. So black's position is falling apart. Therefore, Giri went back with the queen to e7. Still, the queen is holding on to the weaknesses. It's defending pretty well, but now the bishop comes in to d5. This bishop is looking great, much more active than it was on d3. I mean, in hindsight, maybe black even regrets not having traded off the knight for the bishop, which could have been done on multiple occasions. Now the bishop hits the pawn on b7, and it also takes away a number of squares from the black king. So white if it were his turn now, white's probably going to push on the queen side, like b4, kick the knight away, and then try to exert pressure against these two pawn weaknesses. Now black voluntarily dropped back with a knight to e6, but then the queen comes in, and here you see this pawn on b7 is a serious problem. If that pawn falls, the pawn on a6 is going to drop as well. Therefore, black cannot do too much. Decided here to generate some counterplay with the move knight f4. Queen takes b7 is possible. Taking the bishop while protecting the queen immediately doesn't make too much sense. You can just take back with the queen, and white is a very healthy pawn up in this position. So instead of taking the bishop, queen e5 was played, avoiding the exchange of queens. But now there is queen takes a6. That is another very important pawn, and well, most importantly, you create a passed pawn on the a file. If you take on b2, well, then the pawn on d6 is hanging. So that's not offering any solution for black. Black played here f5, looking for counterplay. Typical for this sharp opening is that now black is trying to generate some activity on the other side, challenging the pawn on e4, so to dislodge the bishop from the d5 square. But the queen is coming back to c4. That is a good move, holding on to the pawn on e4. Knight h5, threatening some nasty knight fork on g3. White got to block it with rook f3. That's a good move. Now after knight g3, the king goes to g1, and everything is under control. All the threats have been parried. f4 played, so that you're protecting the knight. The queen no longer has to do that. And now probably black is thinking about taking on b2 very soon. But you want to aim for the exchange of queens. But note that if you play here the move queen c3, so that you looks like you're forcing the exchange of queens, there is knight e2. You're actually losing your queen. So don't do that. Hans Niemann played here the move king f2. Very nice, classy move. Going with the king to the center, but there's no need to be afraid here. I mean, the king is well guarded by his own pieces. And if you do take now on b2, queen c3 is a good move. Queens can be exchanged, but then the a pawn is way too strong. Now, after king f2, king h7 was played, getting out of that diagonal. White played the move c3, so all the free pawns on the queen side stay on the board. Queen e7, and now another beautiful move. Queen b4. What is white going to do? Look at this. Giri doesn't want to sit and wait. He knows that if he's going to wait too long, this a pawn should be too strong. So he goes g4, so that if you take, he wants to get in the queen to h4, opening up the path for the queen to come in. It's probably also good for white, but it's very tricky. With a discovered check coming up soon, this is not what you would like to face. So now, after g4, the rook is under threat. You would expect white to take or move the rook, but look at this. You're completely winning thanks to your outside passed pawn, and the key move is aiming for simplifications. Queen b7 is a beautiful idea. Like, the queens will come off the board, and that's what happened. Queen takes b7, bishop takes b7, black can just take a full rook, and white even has time here to take back with the pawn on f3, and this knight on g3 is out of play. But most importantly, you're ready to push your pawn, a6, a7, maybe go a8 queen, or if you have more time, you can even bring up your b pawn quietly, and then it will also become a new queen. Black is completely busted here, despite being a rook up. d5 played, bishop takes d5. Now, whatever you do, you can try to stop the pawn, but the bishop is controlling the corner square. So, for instance, if you go rook b8, attacking the pawn on b2, I'll go b4. And next is a6, a7, and that is going to be decisive. And, well, that's the plan in general, just to bring up the b pawn. Therefore, black played knight h5. Now the b pawn is not under threat, so you can just go a6, knight f6 played, and here, okay, black is intending to eliminate that annoying bishop, so you better keep the bishop on the board. The bishop maintains control over the queening square, and it is on 2 squares distance of the knight, so it's also dominating that piece. That's a very important technical strategy to keep in mind. Black tried here knight e8, so that after b4 the knight comes to c7, but now the other pawn is coming, and you see that a7 is going to be next. And then there will be the move b6, or probably even the c pawn can join the party as well. So black is in serious trouble. Even if you try something like rook d8, you're not in a rush. King e2 is good enough, preventing the counterplay, and very soon the pawns will be moved up the board. Giri instead went for rook f6. So now you can see that black's idea is to take this pawn, and after taking back there is rook takes c6, therefore a7 is played, and now the same idea no longer works. Giri decides here to give up the rook for the bishop, but now after pawn takes c6 we have this endgame of knight against 4 pawns, but the knight is not a good defender, especially not dealing with a rook's pawn. If you try to bring your king, for instance king g8, white can try to do the same, but another interesting idea is to play h4 and then king g2, king h3, king g4. So you're about to wrap up these pawns on the king side, and well, black is helpless. He cannot deal with these problems on both sides of the board. So therefore g5 was played first to prevent the white king from coming in via this way. But now the white king is also pretty fast. King e2, king g6, king d3, and now the king got to decide. Is it going to the pawns on the queen side or is looking for counterplay? If you do the latter with king h5, then white's king just continues, and well, you can pick up the pawn on h3, but now it's king b6. You're attacking the knight, and if the knight is gone, then it's just promotion of the a pawn. So if the knight goes into the corner, this is one final line interesting to show you. The knight is gone. If you play g4 looking for counterplay, you can take the knight, you can take on f3 as black, but there is c7, f2, c8 queen with check. Completely lost this position. So that's why black decided to go over with the king to the center. King f6, king c4, king e7, king c5. Now the king is supporting the pawns. Knight a8 played, and look at this. Looks as if the knight is keeping out the king from coming into b6. But the next move is very nice. Very nice touch here with the move c7. You're sacking the pawn, threatening to promote. And if you take it, well, there's king c6. You're attacking the knight again. If the king goes to d8, you go king b7. Next move is a8 queen, and the king and pawn endgame is easily winning for white. So rather than taking the pawn on c7, king d7 was played. Now you really want to take the pawn with your king. But look at this. c8 queen. Beautiful shot. You take with the king, king c6. And if the king is going to move, there's king to b7. So the only move here is knight c7. But you have another pawn here to deflect the knight. And you can see that the knight is unable to defend in two different directions. That is just way too much. Knight a8, e6 played, e7 is coming next. If you go king d8, which was played in the game, there is the move king b7. And now the knight is gone. If you go knight c7, you can choose what you want to do. But probably the simplest move here is e7. And if you go king d7, you can even play here the move e8 queen. And if you take with the king, you take the knight. If you take with a knight, well, you can just get a new queen yourself. So that's why in the position after king b7, Anish Giri resigned. I thought this was a very spectacular win, and this brings not only valuable points for the match, but also important rating points for Hans Niemann, as well, he's just climbing up the ladder. I think he's currently, at the moment of recording, world number 24. But there are two more classical games to be played. He's taking a huge lead in the match. He won the blitz portion with 7.5, 4.5. The classical portion he's leading with 2.5, 1.5. And remember that it's counting, every win is counting for 3 points. So also there he has a nice gap. But there are still more games to be played. I'll hopefully cover in the next days some other interesting game from this match. So thanks for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you haven't done yet, but do it only if you really like these videos. Thanks for watching. Bye bye.